Imagine a secret military plan involving more than 100,000 troops and massive preparations standing just moments away from reaching the Ukrainian capital Kiev. But at the exact moment Moscow believed the road to Kiev was finally open, the entire battle turned into an unexpected disaster that completely changed the balance of the war and pushed Russia into one of its most dangerous military crises since the conflict began. These developments revealed one of the most dangerous military strategies Russia attempted in order to reach Kiev through the forests of Chernihiv, where Moscow prepared a massive force for a rapid assault capable of changing the course of the war entirely. The plan relied on stabilizing the eastern front lines before shifting forces northward for a direct strike on the capital. But what Russia never expected was that Ukrainian intelligence had been closely monitoring every movement and was already preparing to destroy the plan before it even began. In the city of Kupyansk, Ukraine launched a massive military operation based on elite forces, modern drones, and coordinated night attacks. Ukrainian troops managed to surround Russian units trapped inside buildings, underground shelters, and hidden strongholds while completely cutting off their supply lines. As pressure intensified, Russian defenses gradually collapsed, turning the city into total chaos for Russian forces surrounded from every direction. Ukrainian forces focused on destroying the final Russian resistance points inside the city center, especially the central hospital building, which had become the last fortress for Russian soldiers. After precise drone strikes and guided munitions, the final organized Russian units inside Kupyansk were eliminated, allowing Ukraine to declare full control over the city and end any effective Russian military presence there. After this defeat, Russia attempted to use small infiltration groups moving through forests, tunnels, and underground pipelines. But Ukrainian drones equipped with thermal cameras tracked every movement and launched precise strikes within seconds, effectively shutting down every possible route into the city. The defeat in Kupyansk was not just the loss of a city. It became a devastating blow to the Russian military, because Moscow had deployed some of its strongest armored and elite units into the battle, losing large numbers of tanks and highly trained soldiers, which severely drained the forces originally intended for the massive northern offensive toward Kiev. At the same time, Ukraine strengthened its northern defenses by building huge networks of trenches, concrete fortifications, and military tunnels, while deploying thousands of experienced soldiers who had gained combat expertise during the battles in Kupyansk, making any future Russian assault toward Kiev far more difficult and dangerous. As the escalation continued, the northern front became the biggest challenge for both sides. Russia attempted to reorganize its forces after suffering enormous losses in the east, while Ukraine used the time to strengthen its defenses on an unprecedented scale along the borders near Chernihiv. Hundreds of reinforced defensive positions, anti-tank trenches, and electronic surveillance systems were built specifically to stop any possible Russian advance. Before it could approach the capital, Ukrainian forces relied heavily on attack drones and electronic warfare systems, which became one of the most decisive elements of the conflict. Tanks and armored vehicles could no longer move freely, as they did during the early stages of the war, and every Russian movement became exposed and vulnerable to rapid strikes within minutes, slowing Russian operations and turning Moscow's planned lightning assault into a long and costly war of attrition. The battles also revealed that Russia did not only lose equipment and soldiers, but also lost the element of surprise, because Ukraine successfully detected Russian movements early and transformed the battle for Kupyansk into a massive attrition trap that forced Moscow to consume its military reserves before launching its main northern offensive. This made the Russian plan appear more dangerous for Russia itself than for Ukraine. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian military appeared increasingly organized and capable of managing modern warfare by successfully combining ground forces, drones, and military intelligence to carry out precise operations that disrupted Russian movements and weakened Moscow's ability to maintain control over key cities and strategic regions. As the battlefield situation became more complex, the war stopped being only about controlling territory and became a struggle over who could endure longer. the conflict gradually transformed into a war of attrition driven by resources, industrial capacity, and advanced military technology. During this stage, Ukraine attempted to use every battlefield victory to increase pressure on Moscow and force Russia to spread its forces across multiple fronts, while suffering rising losses in manpower and equipment. Russian leadership believed the massive troop buildup near the northern border would force Ukraine to withdraw forces from the east, but the opposite happened. Ukraine quickly eliminated the threat inside Kupyansk and then redeployed its most experienced soldiers northward, giving Kiev greater flexibility in both defense and military maneuvering. The fortifications Ukraine constructed around Chernihiv and Sumy were not ordinary defensive lines, but a fully integrated network of trenches, tunnels, bunkers, surveillance systems, and drones operating around the clock. This made any future Russian offensive require enormous troop numbers and logistical support, greatly increasing the chances of devastating Russian losses before any real breakthrough could be achieved. Moscow also attempted to claim battlefield successes and project an image of control, but drone footage and frontline reports exposed the scale of Russian losses and the chaos suffered by Russian units inside the city, severely damaging the Kremlin's narrative on the international stage. At the same time, Ukraine used this victory to demonstrate that the Russian military was no longer capable of launching rapid offensives as planned during the beginning of the war, and that any future attempt to advance toward Kiev would face stronger defenses and far more experienced Ukrainian troops. As the war entered an even more complicated phase, it became clear that modern technology, especially drones and electronic warfare systems, had completely transformed the nature of combat armies, now relied more on real-time intelligence and precision targeting rather than traditional large-scale offensives, giving Ukraine a significant advantage in many recent battles. Amid all these developments, the war entered an even more dangerous and complex stage as each side attempted to exhaust the other before any decisive confrontation. Russia continued trying to preserve its image as a major military power, while Ukraine sought to prove it could stop the largest Russian offensives and destroy the plans that had threatened the capital since the war began. The losses suffered by Russian forces in the east affected not only military operations, but also decision-making inside the Russian leadership, because any new offensive now required enormous time to rebuild forces and replace destroyed equipment, especially after losing large numbers of modern tanks and armored vehicles that once formed the backbone of Russian attacks. Meanwhile, Ukraine continued expanding both its defensive and offensive capabilities, focusing heavily on drones and advanced reconnaissance systems capable of detecting Russian movements even far behind the front lines, giving Kiev a major intelligence advantage on the battlefield. Western military support also played a major role in strengthening Ukraine's ability to resist and continue fighting as Ukrainian forces received advanced defense systems and precision munitions that enabled effective strikes against Russian command centers and supply depots, increasing pressure on Moscow across multiple fronts. As the war continued, the battles increasingly became a long test of endurance and determination, where controlling time became just as important as controlling territory. Every delay in Russian operations gave Ukraine more opportunities to reinforce defenses, reorganize forces, and transform any future assault into another exhausting attrition battle. At the same time, Russia searched for any opportunity to regain balance on the northern front, but the powerful fortifications and battlefield experience gained by Ukrainian troops over the years made any future offensive operation extremely risky and potentially even more disastrous than what happened in Kupyansk. With all these developments, it became clear that the war was no longer simply a conflict over cities and borders, but a battle over the political and military future of the entire region, because the outcome of these confrontations could shape international power balances for many years to come. In the end, the situation remains completely open. While Moscow continues betting on its ability to maintain military pressure, Kiev relies on time, modern defenses, and the gradual exhaustion of Russian forces. The biggest question now is not only who will win the next battle, but how long this war can continue before reaching a decisive turning point that changes everything. And the final question remains, will Russia truly risk launching another northern offensive toward Kiev, despite all these losses, or was the battle for Kupyansk the beginning of the end for Moscow's greatest military ambitions in Ukraine?